that hits the Republic of Ireland initially during the early hours of Tuesday before sending rain and gales into much of the rest of the UK. So soon enough it turns wet and windy across Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Some hill snowfall, western hills of Northern Ireland as well. That rain and wind move east through the day, followed by blustery showers, and the wind's really picking up. 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts in exposed western and eastern parts of the UK, 60 mile per hour wind gusts inland. But as well as the heavy rain and the strong wind, we're going to see a spell of hill snow. Northern England, much of central and southern Scotland, wet snow down to lower levels, but disruptive snow over the hills, blizzards and drifting of snow likely, and over some of the higher routes, 2 to 5 centimetres, and some of the higher spots of Northern England and central southern Scotland, seeing 20 centimetres of snow building up. That's all followed by blustery showers, and Wednesday is another very unsettled day with Barra still centred over the UK. It is filling, so the wind's not quite as strong, but still the potential for gales around South Wales and southwest England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts accompanied by blustery showers. Many places seeing those showers come and go through Wednesday. Further showers, mainly in the east on Thursday, with brighter skies arriving in the west.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hello there, giving the news a twist on this episode of Brazier.
It's recommended if you are not exempt. Right. I'm exempt, so I don't need a mask. You're telling me you're exempt? So mind your business, yeah?
The viral video from a sandwich bar in Manchester that sparked a national debate about face masks and medical exemptions. A leading barrister lays out the law, and proud Mancunian Angela Epstein sets out the context. Order! How much cocaine is used in Parliament? The Speaker of the House of Commons says there's a case for calling in the sniffer dogs. I'll talk to a former parliamentary barman who has some stories to tell. If your job no longer fills you with joy, is it time to resign? Prince Harry thinks so, but is someone who lives in a Californian mansion really the right person to be handing out careers advice to the rest of us? Angela Levin, the most employable of royal watchers, will be with me. I'll also be joined by the train spotter from Yorkshire who was so worried about how his new girlfriend would view his hobby that he pretended to be building a wine collection in his cellar, not Britain's biggest model railway. All that, plus our Twitter poll, tonight's Brazier angle, and the answer to this question. Which horrible disease might be cured as a side effect of taking Viagra? I'll be asking for a friend after tonight's news headlines with Tamsin.
Thanks very much, Colin. Here are the top stories this hour. The Health Secretary says there's now a community of transmission of the Omicron variant across multiple regions in England. Sajid Javid told MPs there are 336 confirmed cases in the UK and it's being found in people who have no travel history. He says it's too soon to know if the variant will be resistant to COVID vaccines.
Can conclude that there is now community transmission across multiple regions of England. We don't yet have a complete picture of whether Omicron causes more severe disease or indeed how it interacts with the vaccines.
The Education Secretary has announced a major investigation into the circumstances surrounding the murder of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Nadeem Zahawi told MPs all agencies who care for vulnerable children in Solihull will be reviewed. He says while the government can't legislate against evil, more must be done to stop it happening again.
The whole nation is distraught at Arthur's tragic and horrific death. We across this House and across this country find it impossible to imagine how any adult could commit such evil acts against a child. But we will take action wherever we can to stop it from happening again, because we must do more.
2 former police officers have been jailed after taking and sharing photos of murdered sisters Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry. Dennis Schaffer and Jamie Lewis shared the photos while they were guarding the crime scene in Wembley overnight. They've been sentenced to 2 years and 9 months. The sisters' mother says they're a disgrace to the force and to mankind.
I would say they are more sorry that they got caught than they are about what they did. You know, they've got caught with their hands in the cookie jar and now they're sorry.
The Prime Minister says Northern Power Grid will reconnect more than 1,000 customers still without power after Storm Arwen hit by tomorrow at the latest. But there's more bad weather on the way. The Met Office has warned Storm Barra will hit the UK tomorrow. Yellow wind warnings are in place across the UK and a yellow warning for snow covers southern and western Scotland. Tesco warehouse workers and drivers are planning a series of strikes in the lead up to Christmas. More than 1,000 people will take industrial action from the 16th of December in response to the company's offer of a 4% pay rise. Well, those are the headlines. Now it's back to Brazier.
Now, a 70-year-old man beaten up and left with severe facial injuries, a 25-year-old man run over and nearly killed, gunshots fired on a council estate. Those were some of the crimes committed in Greater Manchester at the weekend, where the going rate for murders is about 1 a week. 200,000 crimes a year, those are just the ones recorded, policed by a force of 6,800 full-time officers. The thin blue line in Manchester is stretched thinly indeed, but it's thick enough for this to happen. Well, since that was posted yesterday evening, that video has been viewed more than 1 million times, about 1.4 million times. Where social media is concerned, quantity does not always guarantee quality, but I think this smartphone footage with its gobby, bolshy, truculent narrator has hit a nerve. On Twitter, Elliot Batty, for that is the name of the man behind the phone, has been called a COVIDiot, and worse, typical of a new type of activist with a martyr complex. At Horse Meat Supper speaks for many when he said he is purposely provoking the police into arresting him. Also, he's videoing it because he wants attention on social media. He could calmly provide his evidence, but refuses. Sorry, no sympathy at all. Well, this isn't about sympathy. It shouldn't be about emotions, in fact. Not when we're talking about something as fundamental as the decision to deprive a fellow citizen of their liberty. This is about the law and its dispassionate application. Again, on Twitter, lots of our fellow citizens think that even in a city where thousands of violent crimes go unsolved each year, this is how police ought to be spending their time. At Cornish Girl 9 tweeted, I applaud our police for doing their job. It's time our police crack down on blatant law breakers. This idiot thinks he is above the law. If this was a genuine exemption, he would be more than happy to show it. Try breaking the law on seatbelts and see where you end up! Exclamation mark. The point about seatbelts is well made and relevant here. Refuse to wear a seatbelt and you may be arrested. As with face masks, there are exemptions. Some people can't wear a seatbelt for medical reasons. But to avoid arrest, they must carry a certificate of exemption from compulsory seatbelt wearing. The certificate must be kept in your vehicle and, here's the thing, shown to police if you're stopped. So says an amendment to the Road Traffic Act made in the early 1990s. Now look at this. This is the government website on medical exemptions for wearing a face mask. It's quite explicit. You do not routinely need to show any written evidence. You do not need to show an exemption card. It goes on to say, carrying an exemption card or badge is a personal choice and is not required by law. Well, for some people, this is all just so much semantic dancing on a pin. Are Mr. Batty, the man who refused to wear a mask while ordering a Subway sandwich in a Manchester service station because he claims to have asthma, is flouting the spirit, if not the letter of the law? Personally, I would sooner fly to the moon under my own propulsion than gob off to a pair of police officers. I don't think I'm unusual necessarily in that. When it comes to dealing with frontline officers, most of us take the line of least resistance. My first instinct as a natural supporter of the police is to do as they say. But I appreciate that not everyone feels that way, and just occasionally it's worth applauding the curmudgeons, those awkward so-and-sos who won't just go along with what a police officer says for the sake of a quiet life. Mr. Batty may be a nuisance, but by taking his stand yesterday, he makes a powerful statement for all of us about where the limits of the law lie. He is correct to say a police officer in this situation has no right to demand proof of medical exemption. He is correct to assert that his private medical business is between him and his physician, not a topic for public debate between him and a police officer who just happened to be in the same service station as him yesterday. Why does this matter? Because intolerance and compulsion are in the air. The President of the European Commission says EU countries should look seriously, for instance, at mandatory jabs. I had my booster on Friday. I'm not anti-vax, but in a free society, we must be careful not to allow COVID compliance to usher in a law enforcement land grab. It's important we keep pushing back, lest we begin to think it's normal for someone to be threatened with arrest for having what a Bobby on the beat has concluded is the wrong attitude. That's the Brazier angle. Joining me now, the constitutional barrister Francis Hoare. Francis Hoare, very good of you to join us this evening. Do appreciate your time. Can you be arrested for having the wrong attitude?
I'm sorry?
Can you be arrested for having the wrong attitude?
No.
I'm being facetious, but there is a serious point behind this, obviously, and it's the extent to which the police can demand that we share, on pain of arrest, confidential medical information that ought to be the preserve of the relationship between an individual and their GP, for instance.
Yes, and you summarised it extremely well, including in providing the context, the crime situation in Greater Manchester, which is a context and is an important context. The point here is there are two things. First of all, a police officer has to have reasonable suspicion to arrest somebody. And the point here is that do they have reasonable suspicion that somebody is committing an offence if that person tells them, I am exempt from the mask regulation? If that person tells them they are exempt from the mask regulation, do they have reasonable suspicion simply because that person says that they are exempt, that they are telling an untruth, that they are lying? Because if they don't, they have no reasonable suspicion an offence is being committed. And that has two consequences. The first consequence is that person has no requirement to speak to them at all. So while this man was truculent, he was entirely right to say they did not have any right to ask him any more questions, and he did not, on the face of it, obviously this appears to be an ongoing case, but on the face of it, he may not, at least, have needed to tell them any more, at least if they had no reasonable suspicion. He told them that, and that should have been that. And the second point is that a person cannot be arrested without reasonable suspicion of committing an offence. And there are other circumstances, but they again require reasonable suspicion somebody has, for example, committed antisocial behaviour, none of which the police officer said. Showing the wrong attitude to a police officer is not, in and of itself, antisocial behaviour. So your summary was very good, and essentially encompassed what the law is. And yes, you're right to say that there is. It's interesting you pointed to the seatbelt exemption, because that shows that where the law does require you to establish on the street an exemption from a particular law, and it's an extremely rare exemption in the case of seatbelts, it says so. In default of that, there's no reason why an officer should be able to inquire particularly about very important, confidential, very, very private, confidential information in a public place. And there's no question that person was asked to go to a side room and speak to them quietly about the reason for his exemption. But even if they had asked him to do that, unless they had reasonable suspicion that he was lying, they wouldn't have any right to detain him, which is what they were doing. You could see the officer detain that person at that point. He stopped him from moving. That on the face of it, is not something they can lawfully do.
Are these regulations, Francis, just badly framed? I mean, on the point about the seatbelt legislation, that was not conceived, drafted and voted on, presumably, in the depths of a major health crisis. These regulations were. So perhaps we ought not to be surprised that there seems to be a bit of opacity about the way the law is applied.
Well, that's an interesting point, because you say in the middle of a public health crisis, this has been going on for 20 months. And within that 20 months, we have had two previous legislative attempts or legislative measures mandating face masks, albeit with exemptions, but in June last year and in July last year. In both of those circumstances, it's difficult to see how the government could have claimed legitimately that they were in such an emergency that legislation did not need to go through Parliament, which is one of the requirements under the Public Health Act if it doesn't have the scrutiny that is required. And this also, the government still used that exemption that they were supposedly in an emergency that required this legislation without the usual debate for regulations of this sort under the Public Health Act. So there's no excuse for bad drafting. The government's had months and months and months to do that and get it right. But on the other hand, the fact that they don't provide for a person to explain their exemption in and of itself suggests that there is no requirement to do so, particularly because where the state requires that to be said and requires a person to have evidence of their exemption, as with seatbelts, as you rightly said, it says so. So that's not necessarily bad drafting. It just points to the lack of any right of the police officer to scrutinise a person, unless they have reasonable suspicion that they're lying.
Francis, just on that point and briefly and finally, I mean, are we saying on the point about reasonable suspicion that we are expecting our police officers to take a view, to look at somebody and decide on the basis of what they see that this person can't be a beneficiary of a medical exemption? The person in front of me looks really healthy. They're breathing really deeply. They can't possibly have asthma. Let's think about arresting him.
That's not what I meant. What I meant is they have to have reasonable suspicion that a person who says that they are exempt is lying. And a person can be exempt for any number of reasons, and that doesn't require them to look as though they are unhealthy. And so that's the point. And it's a really important point, because a person who is walking, minding their own business, apparently obeying the law, and apparently they are obeying the law if they say they're exempt, does not and should not have to justify their existence and what they are doing to a police officer. They have a right to silence, and they have a right not to be harassed by police officers. We do not live in a police state, or we shouldn't live in a police state. And that means our police officers, and they really should know this because they are getting far too big for their boots in the last 20 months, and frankly, for a lot longer than that, in my view. And I speak with experience of having done criminal cases between 20 and 10 years ago. I'm afraid to say that attitude was seen on many occasions in some of the cases that I did. And so obviously we have some very, very good police officers, and they do an extremely important and difficult job. But on the other hand, it is true to say that in many cases, particularly over the last 20 months, they have reached the view that they have the right to enforce the public health emergency because the philosophy behind the regulations is something that they are bought into, and they ask the public to comply with, and that's a politicalisation of the police. And we've seen in the last 20 months too, many police constabularies using public relations to say not only must you obey the law, but you must obey the law because it is good, because it is to protect other people. And frankly, the evidence that mask mandates in particular do actually protect or other people or make very much difference or any difference at all is decidedly mixed at best.
Francis, that's a clinical debate. That's a clinical debate we've had on many occasions. Indeed. But it's really interesting to get your perspective on the legal aspect here. And I think actually a lot of our viewers tonight might be rather thankful of that clarification that you've offered to them. Thanks so much for your expertise.
My pleasure.
Francis Hawke.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's turn and stay in Manchester, actually. The social commentator Angela Epstein is based there. I wonder what Angela makes of the fact that police officers are doing this sort of thing, Angela, rather than maybe thinking about tackling the 50 murders a year that happen on their patch.
Well, good evening, Colin. Can I first just say that beaming out live from Manchester here, this is not the Wild West. We are a huge metropolitan city. Every one of those crimes is absolutely appalling and hideous and horrible. But I have no problems walking around the centre of Manchester, walking around near where I live or where other people live, any more than I would in any other city. And I think we've got to be careful about badging it as some kind of, territory where you daren't go in because there isn't a police officer for miles and there are people threatening not to wear their masks. Yeah. And I think that they become a bit apocryphal, these stories. And it was a very Mancunian interchange when he was going, mind your business, which is classic Mancunian. Mind your business. We don't say the own bit of mind your own business. It takes too long. But anyway, on a more serious note, I think the problem with this incident is simply this. All the things that the barrister said, I wouldn't presume to conflict with him on a matter of the law. The law is opaque here. If it is a guideline or is it law? Because this chap that was confronting the police said it's only a guideline. And then he said, actually, I'm exempt. Well, if it's a guideline, you don't need to prove you're exempt because there's no legal enforcement there. I think there was a matter of tone here, which was the problem on both sides. You're right, all those things have happened in Manchester. And also in your brilliant introduction, we've heard about individual cases that make us despair at the lack of policing around. Ask anybody who didn't have a burglary reported it's happened to friends here in Manchester, just nothing really happened. So it seems an awful lot of waste of police resources to have two coppers in a sandwich shop saying, put your mask on, lad, or we're cuffing you. But equally, I think that the point that you made is absolutely right. Everybody is a social media warrior now. And rather than thinking, have we got a collective responsibility here? Yes, the evidence is mixed about masks, but certainly the doctors I know, friends in my family, people I've worked with would say, well, better than not wearing them. So why are we making it so difficult? That's the problem.
Just on that specific point, Angela, just on the point about medical confidentiality, you've got a situation, and Francis Hall put it rather well. Here you are, you're in the middle of a subway, crowded subway in Manchester, and you're being asked by somebody we have given the power to ask these questions and make arrests about your private medical background. He's not ushering you off to an anteroom or to the station or to somewhere, quieter. There's an expectation of a public disclosure of your medically confidential information. Just at a, prima facie, that's just wrong. Let's just call it for what it is. That shouldn't be happening.
Well, respectfully, I might have to slightly disagree with you there, Colin, even though you're a very nice chap. The reason being... So it says here, I can't read your writing. Yeah. But in all seriousness, look, if somebody stopped you leaving a supermarket and stuck their hand on your shoulder and said, did you pay for that last item? It's incredibly embarrassing if it was something that fell out of your bag or your basket and it was just, it was something that was a genuine error. There has to be discretion, I agree and I accept. But equally, these are unprecedented times. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I think there was heavy-handedness on the police side, and I think there was too much Mancunian bolshiness on Elliot, the chap who posted the video, because this was about compliance with the law. And the law says you have to wear a mask. And I think if the government haven't provided the infrastructure to show how you're exempt, how else are the police supposed to do their job? But I think there are other ways to crack a nut than doing it the way they did.
Fair play. Angela, good to talk to you as ever. Angela Epstein there. After the break, another voice from Manchester, the charity founder Nick Buckley, on why it's time to stigmatise middle-class cocaine users.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The next 24 hours sees significant changes take place with our weather. Initially, calm and chilly overnight, but then Storm Barra arrives on Tuesday morning, bringing a spell of disruptive wind and hill snow in some places. Any showers through the evening dying away, many places turning clearer and winds dying down. Under those clear skies with lighter winds, a widespread frost forms across central, northern and eastern parts of the UK. Temperatures in towns and cities down to -1 Celsius, in the countryside even lower than that. But it's the calm ahead of Storm Barra, because this is a rapidly deepening area of low pressure that hits the Republic of Ireland initially during the early hours of Tuesday before sending rain and gales into much of the rest of the UK. So soon enough, it turns wet and windy across Wales, southwest England and Northern Ireland. Some hill snowfall, western hills of Northern Ireland as well. That rain and wind move east through the day, followed by blustery showers, and the wind's really picking up. 70 to 80 mile per hour wind gusts in exposed western and eastern parts of the UK, 60 mile per hour wind gusts inland. But as well as the heavy rain and the strong wind, we're going to see a spell of hill snow. Northern England, much of central and southern Scotland, wet snow down to lower levels, but disruptive snow over the hills, blizzards and drifting of snow likely, and over some of the higher routes, 2 to 5 centimetres, and some of the higher spots of Northern England and central southern Scotland, seeing 20 centimetres of snow building up. That's all followed by blustery showers, and Wednesday is another very unsettled day with Barra still centred over the UK. It is filling, so the wind's not quite as strong, but still the potential for gales around South Wales and southwest England, 65 mile per hour wind gusts accompanied by blustery showers. Many places seeing those showers come and go through Wednesday. Further showers, mainly in the east on Thursday, with brighter skies arriving in the west.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Middle-class drug users shouldn't be allowed to see buying cocaine as a lifestyle choice that leaves no victims. This was the message today from government ministers who say it's time to use the power of social stigma to make drug use less acceptable, especially in parts of society where they are taken recreationally, but where the violent crime that goes with drugs doesn't have to be dealt with. Suggested punishments include the removal of driving licences and passports from those found taking Class A drugs. Well, joining me now, the homeless charity founder, Nick Buckley. Nick, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us today. What do you make of this?
It's window dressing. That's all this is. We need to have a serious conversation in this country about what do we want to do with illegal drugs. We've not had that conversation in my lifetime because every politician is too scared to have it because they will lose votes over the older generation. So we're going to, if we're going to persecute and go after middle-class executives for taking cocaine at parties at weekends, which it's illegal, they should be punished. But if we're going to do that, the backlash to the Tory party will be huge in a couple of years. We're going to ruin people's lives. We need to have the conversation, what do we want? If we want to get rid of drugs, that's fine, we can do that. It will take 1 or 2 decades, and we're going to have to live through another COVID. That's the sort of legislation we're going to have to bring in. It means government interfering in your life in every sort of detail, and the punishments will be so harsh. That's how we do it, but nobody in this country wants to live through that.
I just wonder, let's not open that debate, Nick, about legalisation or not. But as the law currently stands, I know you've got strong views on this idea that actually sometimes people ought to be stigmatised. The power of shame, even in the hands of government, is a potentially powerful instrument. Do you, I mean, you say it's just window dressing, but just as a policy, the idea of saying, OK, if you are found, whatever your background, in possession of a Class A drug, part of the suite of punishments that we can use, because we know that, for instance, paying a fine, if you've got lots of lolly, is not going to hurt you very much. Take away your passport and stop you going for your skiing holiday in the January-February half term. That might bother you.
I'm sure it will. I really am sure that will upset a lot of people if that happens. Will we do it? Absolutely not. If we want to look at why most people who take drugs, so the addicts, the people whose lives are falling around, why they're in that situation to begin with is broken families, poor parenting, lack of fathers. So after we start taking away people's passports and driving licence for Class A drug users, do we start going after fathers? And do we start looking at that? And if we do, our Prime Minister better be careful because he won't be getting another holiday without a passport.
Is there not some merit, however, Nick, in this idea that actually make people face up to the consequences of the supply chain they are at the end of? I mean, I know it's become a cliche, this idea that, the middle class is sitting around having their dinner parties and at the end of it somebody pulls out some coke. And actually, I was just talking to somebody earlier in the studio about the story over the weekend about the England match at Wembley, where apparently cocaine use was a really big part of what's going on there, stoking up people, making them a little more inclined to have a punch-up than might have been true hitherto. So, cocaine use, Class A drug use, are commonplace now across all strata of society. But I just wonder that idea, at least there's some merit, maybe, in making people who don't have to face the consequences of living in some of the slums, crime-ridden slums, where drugs can take some people, that there is some merit, at least in making some of those end users face up to some of the harsh realities of things like county line drugs, for instance.
Yes, but I just feel the genie's out the bottle. We're never going to get the genie back in that bottle. Drugs are here to stay. We look at history, we look at what happened in 1920s America prohibition. So they made alcohol illegal. It created the mafia, it created organised crime. People were being murdered. We had the Valentine's Day massacre with Al Capone. People were being murdered. People still drank. Prohibition doesn't work. So we need a whole national conversation over that. I just don't see how we get around the fact that people want to take drugs. We have alcohol, we have cigarettes. It's just a different version of that. I really don't see how we get the genie back in the bottle.
Nick Buckley, there's a lot there to talk about some other time, but for now, that's it. Nick, thanks a lot. Well, as part of the government's launch of a new drug strategy, the Policing Minister, Kit Malthouse, said that even the Houses of Parliament were not immune from the abuse of Class A substances like cocaine. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, said there could be a case for using police sniffer dogs to help find evidence of drug use on the parliamentary estate. Well, joining me now is John O'Sullivan, who's now a comedian, but who once worked in one of the bars inside Parliament. John O'Sullivan, thanks for your time this evening. Do appreciate it.
Good evening, Colin. Hello.
Was it Annie's bar that you used to work in?
Yeah, it was Annie's bar. I worked there in 2003 to 2005.
What was it like?
They loved a drink. There was a lot of drinking, not much work in the evening, a lot of socialising, a lot of drinking, and then more drinking. That's what it was. It was just socialising, having a nice time. And then there was karaoke in the sports and social bar as well.
Was it just, just for people who aren't familiar with the way it works, was it just MPs? Was it peers? Was it lobbyists? Was it journalists? Was it visiting members of the public? Who was it?
Well, the journalists, as you know, they could drink from 11 o'clock in the morning till midnight, especially if they wanted to get a story. So they were around the entire time, but they managed to maintain their dignity. Not all of them, won't name names, but you know a couple. And but it was everyone. It's a giant holiday at the House of Commons, which is what I found.
I wonder how much that's changed, John, since more women MPs who've been very public in their disgruntlement about the hours that are kept there. That idea of votes happening in the early hours that was deeply family unfriendly. And I suppose the argument round, I'm sure you've heard it time and time again from people you were serving another drink to. Well, what else would I do? I've got to hang around till 2 in the morning when the division bell rings. So, I'm going to have a drink.
Well, and they did. And sometimes I remember one MP who was watching I'm a Celebrity and missed a vote because they were having such a nice time. For me, I don't think voting should happen at night. They're pickled. Their brains are pickled by 10, 11 o'clock at night. Do it during the day and leave the premises and go off and have a lovely time. The people that are running our country are off their chops, making decisions on the behalf of all of us. No, it's ridiculous. Of course, I didn't say anything because I wanted to keep my job.
I'm sure you didn't eavesdrop. I'm sure there were
I
MPs
eavesdropped.
Well, and you presumably heard things that were presumably they would keep confidential stuff confidential.
Well, sort of. We had one MP, quite senior. He was a sir. That when the cockle pickers, sadly died on Morecambe Bay, was making jokes about it to me, which, it's for someone to be of that power and who will then tell me a joke and then go outside in front of the cameras and say how sad and sorry they are to see what's happened. It's a really strange place.
Yeah. This is a picture just to identify you, John.
I did work, and I'm sorry, but I don't look like that usually. That's just...
Okay. Yes, pickled that some of them may have been. I wonder to what extent this is a reflection of the types of personalities who were drawn into politics and hadn't necessarily, held down a position in cabinet or got a ministerial post, but they were ambitious, big egos, alpha men and women. And actually, the drink was partly to salve that sense of broken ambition.
Well, a lot of them, use drink to socialise and get stories and find stuff out about each other, use stuff on each other, especially. It's, I understand the socialising side of the House of Commons, but not when they're off it and they've got to do a vote and make decisions. And I don't think it's right. And getting back to the eavesdropping, they did tell me, I was there, and they would tell me stuff. I learned stuff about David Kelly that no one would know. Amazing the stuff that people just blabbed away just to a barman.
My introduction there included talk of drugs. Did you ever, was it booze exclusively, or did you get the sense sometimes that there was more there?
Well, with the Labour MPs, they were always going to be too tight to buy cocaine. So they're more than happy with their £1.80 pints of bitter. But it was the Tories that were predominantly the big sniffers.
And it's important to state, isn't it? This was all quite a while ago now, and things may well have changed for the better.
Oh, I'm sure it's not a hotbed of sauciness now, Colin. I'm sure it's a very normal environment, very safe, very well behaved. It's not. It will still be like that. The House of Commons is a lawless place. They do what they want when they want, and and it's surprising me that the government want to spend so much money getting rid of the world of drugs, because who's going to serve them at the House of Commons if it's all gone?
Would you abolish the boozy culture? Would you close the bars?
No, I know, because that means people I know lose their jobs. I think that it should just be during the day. They should do all the votes and the work during the day, and then in the evening, have fun. That's fine, but not be. They're working at night. Where else could you get? I was going to say a rude word. Get drunk and make decisions and do what? You'd be fired. But there, it seems fine. That I've seen people bouncing off the walls. I've seen an MP pee down the stairs. It's. I know. And he chased me. That's for another time.
It's definitely for another time in private. John O'Sullivan, lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. After the break, a little blue pill and a little bit of blue blood, a medical breakthrough courtesy of Viagra, and an early Christmas gift to the growing army of Prince Harry skeptics.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, Prince Harry missed another golden opportunity to keep his mouth shut today as the multi-millionaire husband of Meghan Markle urged people to give up work. In an interview with an American business magazine, the Duke of Sussex advised folk who feel, quote, stuck in jobs that don't bring them joy to quit and do something else instead. Well, easy advice for someone who lives in an £11 million mansion in California to give to other people with mortgages and bills to pay. Let's turn to the royal writer, Angela Levin. Angela, thanks for coming in. Has he made a bit of a twerp of himself?
I think he's made a huge twerp. I mean, he behaves as if he's got no idea how ordinary people live, and he's always wanted to be ordinary. He said that to me when I interviewed him for writing his biography. He said, I really want to be ordinary, and that's why I do my own shopping in a supermarket. I thought that was a bit of an exaggeration. You can't be ordinary just because you do that. But I understood the feeling he had. He didn't want to be in a goldfish bowl. But this is ludicrous that, in fact, we all know that if you do give up your work without having made preparations or had a lot of money that you could use, you'd be in a worse state. You'd be more mentally ill. You'd be very worried. How do I find food? What am I going to give my children? You know, all that. None of that seemed to come into it. It was an absolute nonsense. But, I mean, he's always had £30 million stuck in his bank from his mother, from the divorce, which Prince Charles paid for. I mean, that's quite an interesting turnaround there. And he's never had to worry about money. He's pretended he has because he got cross with his father because he wouldn't continue to pay him when he left the royal family. But actually, you know, we all have to be responsible. I think if your life is hell and you're not feeling well, then you make careful decisions with somebody to help you, but you don't do wild things like just stop your job and then everything's going to be all right.
Where's the circuit breaker here, the mental circuit breaker that ought to have gone off in his head? Or if not in his head, then some PR flunky who's standing over here saying, don't do it. Harry, you can't talk about people giving up their jobs because people have mortgages, you don't. You live in the 11 million quid mansion, they don't. So don't start talking Californian psychobabble about chasing the dream, the age of Aquarius and all that guff, because actually it's not people's real lives. And you don't live one, a real life that is, do you, increasingly?
He never has. It's very interesting you should say that, actually, because his aides, when I knew him before he left the royal family, said they had to stop him and persuade him not to do a lot of things that would have created havoc. They really looked after him and protected him from that. Everything was written down, where he was going, what he was going to do, and they looked after him. He got quite cross sometimes because he wanted to say things that they disagreed with, but actually you can see how much they are needed. And of course now he just relies on Meghan, and Meghan has an approach to life that a lot of us wouldn't necessarily enjoy or partake or approve of. But I also wondered, you see, in the terms of marriages, if people have marriages that they then feel ill, whether should they ditch that and walk away? Not necessarily, you know, perhaps the person can help you. You know, it's all gobbledygook, isn't it?
Well, and it's on one level it's sort of well-meaning gobbledygook. I mean, this was an attempt, a round-table discussion reported on by a business magazine addressing questions around mental health. Now, ironically, last week we heard Prince William talk about this very movingly in the context of being a paramedic pilot, air ambulance pilot, and how he was deeply moved, scarred even by the experience of going to treat a young man who reminded him of his own son, Prince George. So there is a way of addressing the question, the very delicate and sensitive topics around mental health, without necessarily saying things as daft as, why don't you quit your job because everything will be fine.
Yeah. Well, Harry likes to give us orders now. We've heard that a lot since he left the UK and is now sort of fighting to be an alternative woke royal in California. He was a don't fly, do this, don't do that. Whereas Prince William and indeed Catherine, they say, thank you so much for helping, or, you know, I was in this situation and I saw this very ill child. That's what Prince William was saying, and it broke my heart to see him. You see, it's not about me telling you what to do. It's about having giving an impression and a storyline, which is actually completely understandable.
He's entitled to say what he likes. He's entitled to put his foot in his mouth from time to time. The problem comes, Andrew, with the fact that he still seems to want to hang on to some of the lovely fuzzy royal baggage, that imprimatur that gives him so much more credibility. He's not just Harry Wales of whatever his address is in California. He's got all that mystique behind him, and having that mystique has traditionally required you to keep your trap shut on a whole range of issues. We talk about to what extent his father doesn't on another occasion, but he's gone way further now. He's going way further, and whether that's Meghan's political ambitions or whether that's just him finding that he quite enjoys the sound of his own voice on sensitive topics, who knows?
Yes, my view, and it is just my view, and I don't absolutely have proof of this, is that the two of them want to knock the UK royal family out of the window and actually establish their own woke, modernised royal, which will tell people what to do and look after them, and everyone will actually bow down and follow them. I think that's a long-range attack because Harry is so cross that he could never beat William, because William was always going to be heir to the throne, and he just feels that he was never properly looked after, which is not true. Maybe his parents weren't ideal, but then do you know a parent who is ideal? We don't. So you've got to compromise on that. You've got to work with the parents you had, and if you don't like their way of life, you can live your own. He's gone to live his own, but he's still not come out of the womb, really. He's still clinging on to titles and folk sort of woke visits to New York, and he's got other visits to Australia, I believe, next year, and he's going to carry on as if he's a royal, but on his terms. It doesn't work, and you can't have it both ways.
Angela, appreciate you coming in. Thanks a lot. Now, a survey published last month suggested that the secret to a contented and happy life was to have a hobby. But what happens when a hobby becomes all-consuming? I asked this in light of a really terrific story in the papers today about 53-year-old Simon George, who grew up in West Yorkshire with a view of a busy railway line. Having made a few bob in the car industry, he set about building Britain's biggest model railway with, I think you'll agree, a quite extraordinary degree of attention to detail, almost defies belief. His project recently went on public display, but as it did so did details of Simon's love life. He was so worried, for instance, we're told, that his new girlfriend would find his pastime a little bit eccentric, that he said the cellar where he spent a lot of his time was actually for storing wine, not for the construction of a model railway like no other. Well, I'm delighted to say that entrepreneur Simon George joins me now. Simon, thanks for joining us tonight on GB News. I appreciate your time. I think we're both 53, so of that same vintage that grew up with the Hornby train set. For me, I was quite content with having a small square of carpet to play with, but you had bigger dreams.
Yeah, I did, and this was all about recreating the place that I used to go to as a child. I spent a lot of time. Well, put it this way: I feel that most people as children spend lots of time in the local park or meeting their friends, and for me, it was just a railway line. In West Yorkshire near Murfield, and I just had this idea that I'd sold a business, I had a bit of time on my hands, and I just wanted to recreate it, and that's what I've been doing for the last few years.
My oldest, dearest friend was a train spotter as a kid, and he sort of keeps that quiet. And I hate the fact that that's happened, that the hobbies around railways have become something to pillory. I can't think of anything, more calming or lovely to do. What's happened?
Well, I don't know. The last few decades, let's face it, it's never had the best reputation. But as far as model railways go, people like Rod Stewart, Pete Waterman, they've been a real they've been in the forefront of the model railway industry simply because people know that they're into model railways too. So it's made it a little bit more acceptable. So yeah, as you said earlier, when I met my girlfriend, I just I didn't want her to run away screaming to the hills, so I simply told her that I was a wine merchant in the basement of a large mill that I leased. Simply, because I didn't want her. I quite fancied her actually, so I didn't. I didn't want her to run away. So anyway, it worked. It didn't backfire, and she's still here. So there we go.
Fantastic! How did you? I mean, when you took her along to see it for the first time, was it a case of like close your eyes and you turned on the lights and there it was? And what was the reaction?
Well, actually, she sprung a surprise on me because she came down when I was least expecting it. So she wasn't confronted by cases of wine. She was just confronted by a huge model railway, which she was a bit surprised about. But fortunately, she's got an art degree. She really appreciated all the intricate detail that I built into this model because I didn't just want to build this on a huge scale of a real place. I wanted to build really, really intricate and exquisite detail into it so it'd interest people who came to see it.
And you did that, and we got some photographs that were sent to us. I think you sent them to us here. And actually, I was struggling initially to distinguish between your photographs and what I took to be, real shots taken of actual locomotives. And there's a bit of that's one of them, for instance. I mean, that could be all real. There's a sort of social realism at work slightly. There's a burned out car at one point, for instance. What do you? I mean, a bit too much. I mean, this is not This is not Thomas the Tank Engine stuff, is it? There's a grittiness.
No, it's not. It's probably as far removed from a Hornby train set as what you can possibly get. But yeah, I mean, I remember all these details when I was down there as a child, and I just wanted to. I downloaded hundreds of photos from Flickr, websites like that keep records of places during all sorts of decades. So I was able to make a pictorial map of the real location, and that was basically what I did to, but kind of on a much larger scale than normal.
What's the pleasure, Simon, as you sit back and you see the whole thing working? I mean, I can think back to being a child and having, the toy soldiers everywhere and imagining myself in that battle, in that moment. But as we get older, I get the artistry behind it, and I get the sort of creating a world unto itself. But if you had to sort of explain to somebody who doesn't get it what the pleasure is, what is it?
Well, it's just, again, I keep saying it, but it's recreating the place that I spent a lot of time as a child. And so I can put myself back there, in the early 80s when Maggie was in number 10 and Duran Duran were on in the charts, and just put myself back there again. So sometimes I really do look up, and just for a split second, it's just like being back in 1983. And I don't know, it just gives me a lot of pleasure. I like to sit there with a coffee and just watch the trains go by. And obviously I want people to enjoy it, which is why it's going on tour throughout the UK next year. It's also in the Wakefield Market Hall in Wakefield right at the minute, so people can come and see it right up to Sunday, December the 19th, and kind of enjoy it, really. So that's what it's all about.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned all that at the end. You preempted my final question, which was how could people see it? You told us. Simon, really lovely to talk to you. Yeah. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, you too. Thanks.
Now, this afternoon, details of a huge American study emerged, which we might normally have left for tomorrow's newspapers, but we thought worth sharing as a story so good that it couldn't wait. This is a study of 7.3 million Americans who've been taking the anti-impotence drug Viagra. Not only has the little blue pill helped American men struggling with erectile dysfunction, but it also helps combat Alzheimer's. Now, the drug seems to target some of the proteins that accumulate in the brain, which, left unchecked, cause vascular dementia. We'll find out more about the study on the programme tomorrow evening. We've got one of the researchers from Cleveland coming in to talk about that. Let's return you then to our main story this evening. We showed you that viral clip. 1.4 million people have seen it. Yes, the man concerned, who was, well, a phrase I think I used in my introductory remarks, was gobbing off to police, was saying he didn't need to wear a mask. They said he ought to. He says, I'm medically exempt, I've got asthma. They said, prove it. He said, I don't have to prove it. And we asked you that pretty bald question. If somebody says they are medically exempt from wearing a face mask, should police have a legal right to ask for proof? You can generally tell if you're up beyond 10,000 votes, then it's a subject which has got your goat, and this one has. And 3/4 of those who responded say, no, it is a confidential matter between the individual and their medical practitioner. Just time for some tweets. JT says, I said yes because too many people are fibbing. Andrew says on Twitter, the police should not be wasting their time on people that do not wish to or cannot wear a mask. They have far more important issues to deal with. They could start by arresting real criminals. Simon says no, but they should wear a lanyard if they're not wearing a mask, one or the other. No excuses. If you're not wearing a mask, then by default, you're saying you're exempt. So it's not giving any further info away. It might stop the Too Cool Brigade from not wearing one. Your thoughts continue. Dan Wotton's next.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. The next 24 hours sees significant changes take place with our weather. Initially, calm and chilly overnight, but then Storm Barra arrives on Tuesday morning, bringing a spell of disruptive wind and hill snow in some places. Any showers through the evening dying away, many places turning clearer and winds dying down. Under those clear skies with lighter winds, a widespread frost forms across central, northern and eastern parts of the UK. Temperatures in towns and cities down to